The most painful kind of fear isn't rejection. It's disappointing the people whose approval shaped your entire identity. Because rejection feels sudden. Disappointment feels permanent. It lingers in facial expressions, in silence, in awkward family dinners, in conversations that suddenly become emotionally careful. And closeted people often recognize this long before anyone else does. Long before coming out. Long before relationships. Long before they even fully understand themselves. They notice which topics make the room tense, which identities become jokes, which people the family quietly distances itself from. That's how emotional conditioning begins. Not always through direct hatred, sometimes through observation, through atmosphere, because many closeted people grew up understanding one dangerous psychological rule very early. Love feels safest when you remain emotionally acceptable. That realization changes the nervous system, quietly, over time, especially inside families where approval was connected to performance. Good grades, good behavior, traditional expectations, emotional obedience. Everything felt stable until individuality threatened the image. And that creates a hidden psychological fracture. Because the child slowly realizes, if honesty risks emotional exile, then hiding becomes survival. So they adapt. Not dramatically, precisely. They edit themselves carefully before the world ever asks them to. Voice, behavior, interests, body language, reactions, pronouns, stories. Every detail becomes emotionally monitored. Not because they're fake, because they're trying to remain lovable. That's the part people misunderstand about closeted psychology. Most closeted people are not performing to deceive others. They're performing to avoid emotional abandonment. There's a difference, a massive one, because prolonged emotional masking rewires behavior completely. The brain starts prioritizing safety over authenticity. That's why many closeted people become hyper-aware of emotional reactions. Tiny pauses, tone changes, micro-expressions. Judgment hidden inside concern. Their nervous system becomes trained to detect emotional danger before it fully appears. Especially in families where disappointment was never screamed, only implied. And implied disappointment can psychologically damage someone for years, because ambiguity forces people into constant emotional scanning. Did they suspect something? Did that sound wrong? Did I reveal too much? Am I becoming harder to love? That level of self-monitoring becomes exhausting. But eventually, it becomes automatic. And automatic emotional masking creates identity fragmentation. One self for survival, another self for reality. One version that keeps the family comfortable, another version that exists privately in pieces. That split becomes even more dangerous in modern life, because now identity isn't just experienced privately. It's performed publicly. Social media intensified this psychologically. Closeted people no longer hide only in physical spaces. They hide digitally too. Every photo becomes strategic. Every caption becomes calculated. Every interaction becomes emotionally filtered. One accidental tag, one repost, one expression, one visible moment of authenticity, and suddenly the entire emotional structure protecting them feels unstable. That's why many closeted people become obsessed with emotional control. Control over perception, control over exposure, control over vulnerability, because visibility feels risky when love has always felt conditional. And modern culture makes this contradiction worse. People constantly say, "Be yourself," but they rarely acknowledge the social consequences attached to authenticity, especially inside environments where identity still threatens belonging. Because belonging is psychologically addictive, humans will suppress unbelievable parts of themselves to preserve it, even when that belonging becomes emotionally incomplete. That's the tragedy hidden underneath many closeted lives. They remain emotionally included by becoming psychologically absent. And families often never notice the damage, because the performance looks functional, successful, polite, stable, normal. Meanwhile, internally, the person slowly disappears. That disappearance doesn't happen dramatically either. It happens through repetition. Repeated self-editing, repeated emotional shrinking, repeated suppression, repeated silence, until eventually the person no longer knows which behaviors are authentic and which were built for survival. That confusion creates emotional numbness, not because they stopped feeling, because they started filtering feelings before experiencing them fully. And relationships become complicated after that. Especially romantic relationships, because closeted people often enter intimacy carrying invisible fear. Not only fear of rejection, fear of becoming emotionally catastrophic to everyone around them, fear of destroying family stability, fear of becoming the difficult child, fear of permanently changing how people see them. That fear follows them into dating, into attachment, into vulnerability itself. So many closeted people become emotionally partial in relationships, present, but cautious, affectionate, but guarded, visible, but edited, because intimacy requires exposure, and exposure still feels psychologically dangerous. That contradiction destroys people slowly. They crave emotional closeness, while simultaneously preparing for emotional abandonment. At the same time, and modern dating culture intensifies this exhaustion, because modern relationships often reward emotional convenience over emotional depth. People want love that integrates smoothly into their lives. No complexity, no tension, no emotional disruption. But closeted people often live inside permanent emotional complexity. So they begin fearing something deeper than rejection. They fear inconvenience. They fear becoming emotionally difficult to keep. That fear changes behavior in devastating ways. People overcompensate, overachieve, overperform. Success becomes emotional armor. If they become impressive enough, useful enough, perfect enough, maybe the disappointment will hurt less. Maybe achievement can compensate for authenticity. But conditional acceptance creates hypervigilance. Because when love feels tied to performance, rest becomes impossible. The person never fully relaxes emotionally. They remain alert, monitoring reactions, scanning conversations, preparing emotionally for withdrawal. And this hypervigilance eventually spreads everywhere. Not just family, friendships, dating, social spaces, online spaces. Even compliments become difficult to trust. Because closeted people often internalize one painful belief very early. If people fully knew me, their love might change. That belief reshapes attachment completely, creates reassurance addiction, fear of replaceability, emotional presuspicion. People start interpreting small changes as evidence of future abandonment. Not because they're irrational, because emotionally, They were trained to associate authenticity with instability. And the internet quietly reinforces this fear every day. Modern identity culture rewards visibility, while punishing emotional complexity. People are encouraged to appear authentic, as long as that authenticity remains socially manageable. So many closeted people end up existing in contradiction constantly. Visible publicly, hidden privately, accepted socially, unknown emotionally, included physically, disconnected psychologically. And eventually, the exhaustion becomes unbearable, because emotional masking consumes enormous psychological energy. Every interaction becomes calculated. Every environment becomes emotionally strategic. Even happiness becomes monitored. That's why many closeted people don't feel fully alive around family anymore. Not because love disappeared, because safety did. And humans cannot emotionally unfold where they feel psychologically unsafe. Eventually, the deepest fear stops being, what if they reject me? It becomes, what if they never truly know me, and I spend my entire life being loved only partially? That realization devastates people, quietly, because partial acceptance still feels better than emotional exile. So they remain divided. One identity surviving, another identity waiting. Waiting for the day honesty no longer feels dangerous. Waiting for the day love no longer feels conditional. Waiting for the day being fully visible doesn't feel like becoming the family disappointment. And for many closeted people, that waiting becomes their entire life.